and I'm very happy to welcome all of you today to this, the fourth presentation in our Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. Our office co-sponsors this seminar series with the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs and the Office of Distance Learning and Innovation. And we're very glad you're here today. I do want to remind you before I turn over the virtual floor to our speaker today that this is part of a series every Wednesday at the lunch hour. Please join us now through November 18th for 8 more fascinating presentations that explore the concept of sustainability from a variety of perspectives. We have faculty and staff and students from Westchester University who present, as well as some invited speakers from elsewhere. So for now, let me thank you again for joining us, and I would like to introduce Professor Tina Chiarelli-Helminiak.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad, and thank you for the invitation. Oh, we're getting a little bit of feedback. Or no, there it goes. Okay. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for joining us today for lunch. It's great to be here. My presentation is going to be on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4, which pertains to education, and specifically I'm going to discuss when access to education is not enough. But before we get started, I figured since I don't know everybody on the Zoom and we're not in person, I figured it was important for you to know who I was. And I am an associate professor of graduate social work. I love taking students out into the community. My co-instructor, Professor Johnson, is on here today. We teach a class called Human Rights in Philadelphia, where we use the city as our classroom. I love experiential learning, including taking students on study abroad trips, as well as to the United Nations and to capitals, so that they can see how social work operates on both national and international levels. My research focus is on the intersection of social justice and human rights, especially within the context of higher education and social work. My educational background includes a bachelor's and master's degrees in social work, as well as my PhD in social work. I have a graduate certificate in college instruction, and I spent 3 years at the University of Connecticut Human Rights Institute. I'm a fervent advocate of getting all eligible voters to register and vote. So please make sure you have checked your own voter registration status and make sure you have plans to vote by mail or safely in person. We have a couple of dates coming up here in Pennsylvania to be aware of, including October 19th, which is our last day to update our voter registration. So today I'll be talking about the intentions of the Sustainable Development Goal 4. I'll be talking about the challenges and limitations of addressing only access to higher education, and then I'll provide some human rights-based recommendations for improvement and how we can get students not only to access higher education, but through to graduation. And my intention is to leave some time at the end so that we can have some discussion. So just wanted to let you know this presentation is based on an article published in the Journal of Access, Retention, and Inclusion in Higher Education. This is an open access journal. The link is provided there for you, and it's also available through our Westchester website. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Terry Lewis, for his contributions to this article, as well as to this presentation. Dr. Lewis and I both joined the Westchester faculty in 2014, and we were hired to teach primarily on the Philadelphia campus. Much of our discussions, which eventually led to the article, were based on our experiences working with adult urban learners, as well as seeing the overlap with our students on the Westchester suburban campus. We initially presented our thoughts and ideas at a University of Connecticut Human Rights Institute Economic and Social Rights Group's annual conference, where our colleagues helped us to refine our ideas into this article, and another one that is going to be based on a human rights-based approach to advising. So I encourage you to read it, which includes a case study in relation to higher education in the US. So the right to education is a critical freedom that has been included in international human rights treaties and documents since the formation of the United Nations. Along with civil and political rights, which are often the focus in the US, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights includes 6 significant social and economic rights, which include the rights to social security, the right to work, the right to food, health, and housing, and the right to education. While Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights promotes access to learning across the lifespan, it specifically states that higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. The right to higher education has been reinforced in other key human rights documents, including Article 13 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which states higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of capacity by every appropriate means, and in particular, by the progressive introduction of free education. Article 28 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child also states, higher education shall be accessible to all on the basis of capacity by every appropriate means. The inclusion of a right to education in these and other human rights documents highlights the role education plays in realizing other social, economic, and cultural rights, as well as our political and civil rights. While the right to higher education has historically been included in human rights treaties and documents, it is important to note that higher education was excluded from the Millennial Development Goals. So while the Millennial Development Goals unified the development targets of the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals further this mission by strengthening the capacity of the Global North and Global South nation states. By extending the Millennial Development Goals, education is one of the 17 goals and includes 10 of the 169 targets in the Sustainable Development Goals. Most notably, equal access for men and women is important as girls and women continue to lag behind boys and men in terms of access to education at all levels, not just higher ed. In addition to gender equity, the Sustainable Development Goals are rights-based and consider systemic causes of poverty. The 4th Sustainable Development Goal ensures inclusive and quality education for all and promotes lifelong learning, which aspires that by 2030, which is only 10 years away, all women and men will have equal access to affordable and quality education, including at the university level. This is a lofty goal, and it's not only relevant in the Global South, but in the Global North as well. And in this presentation, I will focus exclusively on education at the university level, using the United States as our focal point. In this critical policy analysis, I will question whether access to education is enough, as social injustices and human rights violations impact students' success in the classroom. So before we go any further, I think it is important for us to address that US exceptionalism is present when it comes to human rights. This sense of exceptionalism is explained in part by the historic stance of the United States. That is, human rights violation and practices are often considered appropriate for other countries, but not the United States. While making allowances for human rights violations in the United States, it's often in the context of specific issues that oftentimes relate to international concerns, such as sex trafficking, rather than present issues in the United States, such as poverty, education gaps, and other inequities that result from historic and systemic level policies and practices. In the United States, the intersections of race, class, and gender in relation to quality education and success are often ignored. This extends to other economic and social rights, including access to quality food, healthcare, housing, work with a livable wage, security, benefits, and sufficient security when intersected with educational access and success also being disregarded. The United States is unfortunately the only member state of the United Nations that has yet to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Only 192 countries are the only one. Whoops. go back one more. Sorry about that. So regardless of whether the United States ratifies a convention or calls human rights violations what they are, social injustices have an impact on access to college, retention of students, and graduation rates. The United States is an appropriate venue to consider the promise and limitations of Sustainable Development Goal 4, specific to access to higher education. Not addressing the Sustainable Development Goals in the context of the United States allows for the ongoing perception of US exceptionalism. So there are social injustice and human rights violations that impact access to college and graduation rates. Child abuse and neglect are human rights violations that have long-term consequences, especially related to school success. Adverse childhood experiences, also called ACEs, in addition to incidents of child abuse, include experiences of food insecurity, parental alcohol and drug use, parental separation or divorce, as well as the presence of someone in the household going to prison or experiencing mental health issues. Higher ACEs scores are linked to greater risk in behavioral and health outcomes in adulthood, including academic achievement and graduation. Education, as we all know, is a crucial resource and tool for social mobility, especially in the United States, where a university degree is seen as the way to advance in terms of economic stability, social class, and status. Unfortunately, education achievement gaps highlight stark differences between socioeconomically privileged and disadvantaged children, with students coming from resource-rich communities more likely to not only access higher education, but to graduate with a university degree. Success in higher education is dependent on the quality of primary through secondary education, and unfortunately, many US students from traditionally underrepresented and marginalized communities are inadequately prepared to succeed at the university level. Additionally, frequent school changes is not an uncommon experience for children in the United States. The US General Accounting Office reported statistically significant differences between children who move schools frequently, meaning 4 times or more, and those who move 2 or less times. In a meta-analysis, Mihana and Reynolds found frequent moves before the 6th grade resulted in lower academic achievement due to disruptions in teaching, interference with peer and social environments, and students' lower socioeconomic status. The authors went on to report that low-income, minoritized children who moved frequently during their foundational years of school experienced more negative effects of frequent moves. And this is all pre-COVID. We know that the pandemic is exacerbating inequality in terms of housing, healthcare, education, and many other factors. With the prevalence of systemic disparities that disproportionately impact minoritized individuals and communities, we know that access to education is not enough. So why do some students not graduate? Once accepted into a program of higher education, students from traditionally underrepresented and marginalized communities are often less likely to graduate. As tuition-driven institutions, US colleges and universities are motivated to increase their recruitment and enrollment of students. Seen as a leader in higher education worldwide, the United States has faced a decrease in public funds allocated for higher education, forcing universities to look to business models and fundraising professionals for guidance on diversifying their income sources. Such movement mirrors trends occurring in the US social welfare system, where less public funding is put into social programs and more social services are privatized. Students are directed to private lenders as student financial aid in the form of public grants diminish. According to the US Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics, over a 10-year period beginning with the 2003-04 academic year, the cost of a public institution increased by 34%, while the cost at a private institution only grew by 25%. And this was calculated after inflation adjustment for undergraduate tuition, housing, and associated fees. Rising costs and declining financial aid continue to jeopardize not only access to higher education for many potential students who lack financial resources, but the very basis of the mission of public higher education. Relative to this trend of increased costs and decreased aid, college debt in the US is at an all-time high, making many potential students question whether a college degree is worth the expense. In an effort to level the playing field, former US President Barack Obama proposed free universal community college education. Utilizing public secondary education as a model, the America's College Promise would equate to an average savings of $7,600 per student for the 2 years spent at a community college. An estimated 9 million students per year would benefit from such a program. The proposal would greatly benefit minoritized individuals and women who make up 40 and 57% respectively of community college students. America's College Promise Act of 2015 was introduced in the House of Representatives in July of 2015 and subsequently sent to the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Training in November 2015. Such an ambitious plan would have been a step in the right direction of working towards providing equal access to higher education in the US, yet the proposal gained absolutely no bipartisan support. Research indicates that the socioeconomic diversity of college students has gradually improved in response to modest efforts to develop more inclusive recruitment and admission strategies. But yet, despite these new strategies, higher education is not efficiently or effectively addressing multiple barriers that exist for students from underrepresented or marginalized communities. Some of the admissions barriers include poor academic and psychosocial preparation for college, inadequate financial aid, and the continuation of advisement strategies that favor traditional students. And in addition to these admissions barriers, most college students and universities struggle with significant attrition rates. A significant number of students drop out during their first 2 years in a 4-year undergraduate degree program. Documented barriers to graduation include financial fragility, healthcare fragility, inadequate emotional support on campus, inadequate academic support services, and maintaining multiple underpaying jobs to meet basic living needs. An additional barrier, especially relevant to women, is competing caregiver responsibilities, typically for minor children and elderly family members, which, as we all know, is not reimbursed in the United States. While managing these life stressors, many students give up on their dreams to pursue a college degree, a profession, and a better standard of living for themselves and the families. And again, this is all pre-pandemic, which have introduced new barriers, such as children being home needing support for schooling remotely, childcare facilities being closed, as well as adult care facilities being closed, respite facilities being closed for individuals with disabled family members or older adults. And adult learners are having to navigate unfamiliar technologies to access their own classes. Unfortunately, the complexity of the current inequalities in the United States educational system require a multi-dimensional assessment and intervention plan to achieve the sustainable development goal related to education. Taking into consideration systemic inequalities, historical oppression, and the unique needs of underrepresented, minoritized, and first-generation college students. Therefore, it seems pertinent to question whether access to education is enough, as systemic social injustices and human rights violations contribute to and result in the presence of these multiple barriers. What I propose is a human rights culture within institutions of higher education as a critical issue to be considered. The academy is built around divisions and silos, whereas a human rights culture revolves around collaboration and interdisciplinary engagement as an academic priority. Supportive relationships between faculty, staff, administrators, and students should be encouraged, as no one department or office can claim to know it all. Therefore, the traditional silos built up in institutions of higher education must be dismantled to be replaced with a human rights-oriented organizational structure that fosters interdisciplinary collaborations and learning environments, like this seminar series we're part of today. I'll sure to be a long and arduous process, assessing and retooling all aspects of university policies and practices to promote a human rights culture has the potential to provide better academic support for students from traditionally underrepresented and marginalized communities, from recruitment through graduation. Again, seminars and mutual aid models for supporting faculty can be used as a starting point to promote a human rights-based culture on campus. Purposefully engaging the university community to encourage collaboration and interdisciplinary engagement will reduce isolation of faculty and staff, encourage discussion on success and challenges, create a supportive learning environment, and enhance collegial solidarity. An example is 2 academic years ago, we promoted on the Philadelphia campus a seminar series on teaching the adult urban learner. And through it, we as the disciplines on the Philadelphia campus were able to join together on a regular basis to discuss ways to support our students through graduation. Finally, a human rights culture can be facilitated by the inclusion of teaching human rights across curricular content. As human rights are universal, inclusion across disciplines will promote knowledge and understanding of human rights documents, processes, and principles. Resources related to teaching human rights at the college level are often discipline specific, but interdisciplinary course offerings will help to promote collaborative engagement as previously discussed. Teaching from a human rights perspective has potential to impact society, facilitate the realization of human rights beyond the ivory tower, and overcome US exceptionalism. For those of you who are unfamiliar with how human rights might fit within your discipline, the Teaching Human Rights website, which is available at teachinghumanrights.uconn.edu, offers over 100 syllabi and a number of lesson plans geared towards integrating human rights content at the university level. Please know I do not propose that teaching through human rights lens is a panacea. In fact, Linden authors suggest that a critical approach to teaching human rights is necessary. How do you teach a critical approach? It takes into account history, both the history of the progression of human rights, historical and present examples of colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism, and the intersectionality of inequalities is especially relevant for students coming from marginalized and minoritized backgrounds. Connections to the local content. Students should be encouraged to critically examine their position in society and apply systemic inequalities to their lived experiences. Forging relationships. Teachers and professors, we must develop meaningful relationships with our students that foster not only professional mentoring, but allow students to engage in the process of self-determination. Students should also be given the opportunity to engage in the local community as part of the educational process. And then finally, we must challenge the academy. We must teach students by example and advocate for the best interest of them, while doing it in collaboration with them. At the same time, we must recognize our own position of privilege within the academy, as well as our own baggage, and hold ourselves and one another accountable. So in conclusion, this critical policy analysis of Sustainable Development Goal 4 in the context of the United States higher education provides the impetus for more empirical research. A body of literature related to underrepresented minoritized students must consider historic and personal social injustices and human rights violations when considering access to human rights through graduation. Boudica and Parr, Lawson, Reamer, and Randall found the promotion of one right, such as education, is an immediate investment in the promotion of other rights. Highlighting the indivisibility and interdependence of human rights, the right to education is vital to the realization of other social, economic, and cultural rights, in addition to political and civil rights. So thank you for being here today, and to the Office of Sustainability for organizing and inviting me to participate in this seminar series. I'll now open it up for some discussion. And I can put a couple of those links in the chat for everybody, if that would be helpful.
We usually encourage people to either put a question in the chat if they prefer, but we try to be informal too. So if you're comfortable, Tina, people can just jump in, unmute themselves and ask a question.
Totally.
I have some, but I want to hold back and give other people a chance first.
And I have a question. I'll try to use actually talking to you guys, but if it gets too windy, I'll switch to the chat.
Okay.
And this might be out of the scope. I know you touched on this a little bit, and so I wonder, I might be going too far out of your scope. But you know, the American education system is a system, and so we're seeing, especially throughout the summer into the fall, that our American systems are dealing with historical oppression, are dealing with inherent micro and macro aggressions. I like this idea of more training, more curriculum, changing our syllabi, but you also touched on a need for actual systemic change, policy change. Can you speak at all to that? Are we going too far outside of the purveyance of the talk today? And you can tell me to shut it down.
No, I actually see the world more through a macro lens, even though social work is frequently associated with micro level interventions like counseling. I actually approach my work from a more macro standpoint and thinking about how we can make changes in individual schools, societies, as well as at the federal level and even the international level. And that's why I take my students not only to out and about in the communities in which our campuses are located in, but also to our state capital, our national capital, and to the United Nations. We can't make these changes individually. And what we're seeing in the pandemic is that our system of federalism and each individual community makes its own decisions is not working. And it doesn't work with a pandemic response, and it hasn't worked with our schooling response. And so we're even seeing with the pandemic, the inequalities that are happening. So I have a second grader. I have a number of friends and colleagues who also have second graders, and the amount of different approaches that are being taken right now in schools is so extreme. Like, how do we have any confidence right now in any of the education that our kids are getting when 20 minutes of a 45-minute Zoom session are spent on technical assistance, right? And our teachers are not trained for this. So we need national leadership. I've read some books about the history of school in the US and how it is, especially public education, is a way to indoctrinate us in the norms and cultures of the United States. And if that's what public education is, well, then let's change those norms and traditions. Let's start with teaching our kids, number one, what are your rights? We do a study abroad to the Dominican Republic, and each time that we've been down there, the students have helped with human rights education for the students. So teaching the kids that they have a right to not be working, they have a right to not be abused. We don't teach those things to our children. And we do need more macro level responses. We need a Department of Education that has the rights of students at the forefront of everything that they're doing, not privatized companies or privatized schools. We need to focus in on what it is we need as a nation. And also part of US exceptionalism is ignoring what's happening internationally. So, you know, there's also ways for us to look at what have been done in other democratized countries and see how they are trying to close the gap in educational outcomes.
So Tina, I have a question for you.
Sure, go ahead, Walt.
Or just something that occurred to me. So I like the phrase promoting a culture of human rights, but it reminds me of a lot of other efforts to do the promotion of a culture within, and particularly within the institutional constraints of a university like ours. So there are efforts to institute a culture of sustainability, for example, and a culture of assessment, and a culture of diversity and inclusion, and so on. And these are, not that any of these should really compete with each other, and they're all worthwhile, although the whole assessment thing, people can really differ on that, I think. But like whenever you go to CAPSI to try to implement something like this, there are certain barriers there, and I think some people would roll their eyes and say, oh, yet another thing that we're trying to fit into our curriculum. So how do we smooth those things over and embrace all of the worthwhile causes to improve the educational experience and people's lived experience in the world?
Yeah, that is a great point, and something that I'm smiling about, because back when I was doing my doctoral work, the doctoral program director, who was very well respected in the field and had written some of our seminal books on social work practice, said to me, well, isn't human rights just a bandwagon issue? Aren't we gonna, move on from this in a couple of years? And, oops, sorry, that's the recess bell. So I don't believe that human rights is a bandwagon issue. I believe that in social work in particular, and as we're watching what's happening right now in the United States and across the world with protests for racial justice, I think that now is the time for human rights to become part of our dominant discourse, to start discussing what are these 30 articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and to move from needs-based to rights-based language. Oftentimes in social work, we talk about the need for housing or the need for a clean environment, but really we all have the right to housing. We have the right to a clean environment. And what I see as the benefit of a human rights culture is that it's encompassing of those other things that we're trying to build culture around. So sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, they all fit underneath. Now, assessment doesn't, but evidence-based things are important when we make decisions, but so are culturally relevant interventions and approaches. And so human rights could really be this organizing umbrella that we could then start thinking about, how do these things fit within, not just another add-on, but how do we approach everything? So one of the things I mentioned at the beginning was this human rights-based approach to advising. And so what we're really trying to do in our department is approach our students with a high-touch advising model that's not common in graduate programs. Graduate advising is really this kind of like, call me if you need me, but otherwise good luck, I'll see you at graduation. Whereas we're involved in our students' lives. We want to know what's going on in their lives so that we can help them move on from whatever it is to successfully graduate. And I mean, Ben has done amazing things with the Student Success Center down in Philadelphia, where, it's not just a writing tutor, but it's success for getting through the college experience. And I think that, we've done some innovative things, not only in our program, not only at the Philadelphia campus, but also in the way in which we're trying to educate our students to really look through a human rights lens to the social injustices and human rights violations that are impacting many of us. I don't think any one of us could say we've not experienced some sort of social injustice in our life. Kristen posted, in my moonlighting life as a PhD student. Oh, Kristen, good luck. Or you're done, but I'm looking at the intersection of online learning assessment and racial inequality through both technology tools and assessment design. I keep having to step back into more macro and macro levels, and I so appreciate some of the frames described here. And thank you, human rights is not a bandwagon issue. I have to point out Kenneth Johnson here to everybody. He's an alumni of WCU in Philadelphia. He's also my collaborator, co-conspirator in teaching our Human Rights in Philadelphia class. But he also is somebody who approaches things from a macro basis. And some of the most in-depth conversations and thought-provoking conversations I've had over the past few years have been with Kenny. And just thinking about how the macro influences everything that we do. We can't ignore it. And I think that we do that in an individualistic society like the United States, where we just get in our blinders on and we think about what's happening at the individual level. And in social work, we try to approach everything from an ecosystems perspective. Bronfenbrenner, Kenny and I both love. We talk about Bronfenbrenner a lot. And it's not only the macro, because that's what, Bronfenbrenner provides us with this scheme where we're looking at the micro, the meso, the macro, but he also included the chrono level. And I think that that's something we often ignore, not just in social work where we should be applying it, but we ignore in society. Like, how can we ignore that we're all living through a pandemic right now and what the impacts this is going to have on education, on environmental issues, on political rights? We can't ignore that, and we can't ignore the systemic inequalities that have been present in education systems since the beginning of schooling in the United States. We can't ignore segregation that happened and is still occurring in some communities across the country. We can't ignore, where we are as a society and the times in which we have lived through up until this point of 2020. So thanks, Kristen. Good luck. You got it. It's a marathon. Got it.
If I can chime in very quickly, I just wanted to add thank you for mentioning me in there. But I also was wondering, and I guess yourself, Dr. Tina, and anyone can kind of chime in, is as you talk about building this human rights educational experience on campus, on campuses across. I think it's important for us to also realize that in these different disciplines, in these different silos that you use the word, that the different disciplines work in, that we start to, which you did mention, we start to shift away from that. Because as a social worker, it's becoming intrinsically important that we have an understanding of business and economics. Mm-hmm. And we also have an understanding of how the actual internet and wireless systems and things of that, at least on its most basic level, work, so that we can have those conversations with the particular communities out there, so that they can really understand what's going on within these particular systems, because we ourselves as social workers don't understand, and we oftentimes find ourselves deferring to someone else who we see as the expert. And on the flip side, when it comes to teaching in one of these other silos, one of these other academic disciplines, I think it is important that there be, I know that everyone has a portion where they teach on ethics in any discipline that's being taught, but I think that needs to be carried on across, that they understand that what they're doing can have a major impact on other systems and other communities. Be it if they're working in mathematics, be it if they're working in chemistry, biology, or whatever, that they have to take a step back and look at what the impact of the work they are even conceptualizing to do will have on the communities that surround them and that are just in the world in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what we miss out on when we are siloed, and not to, be a cheerleader of UConn Human Rights Institute, but it really did impact my own understanding of human rights and how we interact with each other as a human body, in just thinking about how what I'm doing, and like Kenny said, how what I'm doing as a social worker impacts people, but also how what the economist is doing is impacting the person that I'm working with. How what they're doing in business practices is impacting the person whom I'm working with. And so the Teaching Human Rights database of syllabi came out of a group of us as graduate students that were struggling within our own disciplines on how to teach human rights. And then us just meeting on a regular basis to say, okay, how does anthropology approach this? How's political science approach this? How's economics approach this? And then we were like, we need to get these ideas out there to people. We had the idea to write a textbook, but as college students, we were like, we don't have time for that. So the online database is accessible for everybody. It doesn't have to be a book that you purchase. It's free. And there's syllabi out there that people have willingly have given to us. We've gotten the UC Berkeley actually gave us their database that they had collected over the years because one of their professors retired. And they were like, here's our database, put it into yours. And now there's a collaborative of human rights educators that are actually looking to take on our syllabi project, just because we've all kind of dispersed among our academic careers and on tenure track and things like that, have kind of gotten away from soliciting so much for the database. But like Kenny said, we need to have these understandings of what's happening in other disciplines and how we can teach our students, who will eventually be the economists, the political scientists, the business leaders, how these things impact them. And, you know, I know that we have the ethics initiative here at Westchester, but, you know, do we have a business class in sustainable models? Do we have a business class on the impacts of human rights of the global supply chain? You know, these are things that our colleagues should be thinking about. And hopefully with Lisa on the call from the College of Business and Public Management, she could influence some of those courses to be occurring.
Thanks so much for this. I've got to say, like, I'm so happy to hear somebody talking about this. Brad knows all about my struggles over the past couple of years to try to graduate from Temple University as like an adult student. And a lot of the things that you touched on, I mean, I wasn't prepared for the sorts of barriers that actually existed for people that just were over the age of 25. You know, I was told that the amount of financial aid, you know, that loans that would be given to somebody over the age of 25 was limited just based on my age. So I wasn't given enough to take a full-time load, and because I couldn't take a full-time load, I was then not eligible for scholarships, and I was also not eligible for health care or any of the other benefits that came through the university. So you really find yourself in this sort of catch-22 situation where you're just falling through the gap. And a lot of the other adult students that ended up coming and were a part of some of my night classes, because those were the only ones that, you know, I could attend, struggled even more because, like you said, they had parents that they had to care for, they had children, they also had jobs. And we found that our best resource actually was our instructors, because the university was just not doing enough to support those students. And so, you know, I just felt like I wanted to say how important it was, you know, for me, and I know for others, for faculty members, I was in the English department, that they were the ones that really helped us and, you know, helped us find funding for things and, you know, directed us to the right people to say, you know, you're not offering enough evening classes, you know, that are accessible to us. You know, so just, I mean, even equipping faculty members to sort of almost be in a social worker position to their students, you know, not just teaching, you know, these skills for, you know, when they graduate and get on the job. But I found that the faculty members were really almost the social worker that I needed to help direct me where I needed to go to even graduate. So.
Right. Well, I'm glad that they were there to support you and had the knowledge to point you in the direction of the resources. Some faculty members, even though they're well-intentioned, they might not have that information, especially when We have new faculty that move to a university from a different area and they're not familiar. So I'm really happy to hear that your Temple professors were able to support you in that way. I do know the Temple School of Social Work actually has a social worker on staff for their students to help them to connect with resources. That is a very unique model. It's the only one that I've thus heard of, but how awesome would it be if we had a social worker for students on our campus? There's some, I don't know what the right word is, but there's some reason that social workers can't be employed at our counseling center on campus. And that is a real barrier to our students who may not need therapeutic intervention, but need someone to guide them to the resources that you're eligible for, like you're saying, because maybe they can't take the full load, or maybe they're ineligible for loans, they've maxed out their loans. There are so many things that we could do better in supporting our students with, and it oftentimes falls on the faculty members or the staff members. And you know, as one of our colleagues at the Philadelphia campus, Marcy Cohen, goes above and beyond. She acts not only as you know, the person who plans events on our campus, but sometimes she has to put on a registrar hat, a financial aid officer hat. She hurries books back from the bookstore to the Philly campus. Like, she's one person and she's doing the best she can, but you know, it's a lack of resources that even within Westchester, where we have these cultures of inclusion, we're not even hitting the mark yet as our flagship public university. And it's not to say that also on the Westchester campus, our students aren't getting some of the resources that they need. And you know, we've really tried to encourage our students to come to us because we are social workers first. Even before we put on that professor hat, we are social workers at our heart.
Tina, it's 10 to 1, and we usually pause here to let people who do have to get to another class or meeting sign off. But if you have a few more minutes and there are more questions, would you be able to stay a few more minutes?
Sure, I've got the substitute teacher in there with the second grader, so I'm good.
Great.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Ben.
See you, Tina. Thank you so much. It's good
Thanks,
stuff.
Walt.